Good morning and good afternoon. My name is John Herbst, and I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have a wonderful panel today to talk about Moscow's ongoing assault on Ukraine. We have General Philip Breedlove, the former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe. We have Ivana Klimpoush-Tsintsadze, a member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine and the chair of the Parliamentary Committee on the Integration of Ukraine into the EU, and a former Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine. We have David Kramer, a senior fellow in the Václav Havel Program for Human Rights and Diplomacy, and a director for the European and Eurasian Studies at Florida International University's Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs. Woo. And David's also a former Assistant Secretary of State. And finally, we have Oksana Nechiporenko, who's the director of the Global Office, and she'll be talking about the humanitarian side of this ongoing crisis. I'd like to start with General Breedlove and ask him about the military situation in Ukraine. We've seen a valiant resistance by Ukrainian military and Ukrainian public. Moscow's offensive has gone very slowly. They clearly have not achieved their aims of quote unquote decapitating the Ukrainian government. So Phil, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and it's great to be on with an incredible panel like this. Things have gone slowly for Russia, and I believe that is attributable. You've heard so much about it. I believe it that they planned for a very different sort of attack, that this would be over in 2 or 3 days, and that they would be welcomed by the rest of Ukraine. They grossly misjudged that. And so they have had some big logistical problems, and they continue, frankly, in some areas. But the sad news is that we see the attack now beginning to develop some momentum, especially in the south. And it will not be long before I believe the south will be cut off, the coastline will be cut off, and Ukraine will be a landlocked nation. And that is going to be very hurtful to the Ukrainian people and their economy and their ability to recover from this. The advances in the north are still going very slowly, although they are beginning to pick up. Kharkiv is now taking a pounding, and I call it now depopulation efforts, and the direct attack, an indiscriminate attack on civilians goes on there. Unfortunately, in Mariupol in the south, we see the same thing. Mariupol now cut off, fairly encircled as the land bridge to Crimea continues. And now Mariupol is going through the depopulation effort of Russia and is taking indiscriminate bombing rather than discrete penetrations by armed forces. So the Russian advance is ponderous still a bit, but it is relentless, and there's still a lot of force to be applied. And so I believe it's time for us really to focus on what are the other tools we can use to help our Ukrainian brothers and sisters.
All right, thank you very much for that. Ivana, President Zelensky has responded heroically to Moscow's invasion, or new invasion, I should say. So have other political leaders. How does the war feel as you face Russian bombs, rockets, and troops? How is Ukrainian morale?
I think it's the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian armed forces who actually responded with great courage to this brutal attack that was waged against Ukraine, by the madman Putin, and is being carried out by the Russian troops in this particular moment. Across the country, the situation is pretty difficult. And yes, from the north, from the east, from the south, we are being bombarded, we are being shelled, we are being shot at, we are having unfortunately, a lot of subversive sabotage groups across the country that, so artillery fire going on, regular shooting is going on. They are attacking us indiscriminately, shooting and bombing the hospitals, kindergartens, residential areas, also the critical infrastructure objects. I think this night yet again showed that Russia is using nuclear terrorism by attacking the biggest nuclear power station in Europe in Zaporizhia, and taking it under its own control, as they initially did already with Chernobyl power station. And that is, those are the areas which we understand that there is a threat also of technological catastrophes, ecological catastrophes, not to mention the power outages that are happening also in many cities, specifically, for example, in Sumy Oblast, the region is totally cut off the electricity, and so on and so on and so on. So the situation is dire, but people are showing incredible resolve to withhold this attack. And I think that that's something that was underestimated by both Putin and, I'm sorry to say, our Western colleagues as well. I don't think that anybody expected that Ukrainians will resist in such fearful fightings as we do right now. People are lining up to territorial defense. People are self-organizing. People are trying to help the Ukrainian authorities as much as they can, and try to respond to the needs of the people who are becoming internally displaced people and who are also becoming refugees. So all of this is ongoing, but definitely during the war, there is a lot of disorganization. There is a lot of maybe duplication of different activities, and that creates additional pressure on people, not to mention the psychological pressure that is being exerted at Ukrainian people. I think all this fights and all this shellings and all the pressure on the civilians that is being done, and the use of forbidden weapons such as cluster bombs, such as vacuum bombs that has already taken place on the territory of Ukraine by Russian forces, is used in order to frighten Ukrainians, in order to disorganize us, and in order to disable us from fighting back.
Thank you very much. Okay, David, Moscow has faced not just such setbacks on the Ukrainian battlefield, but I would actually say crushing defeats globally. Major sanctions from the West, and for that matter, other countries, an end to Nord Stream 2, substantial weapon supplies to Ukraine, not just from the US, but many European countries, and perhaps most amazingly, a complete turnaround in Germany's policies towards Moscow, a repudiation of the naive Ostpolitik of the past, and a willingness to even stand up and send weapons to Ukraine. How do you assess the impact of this response on Moscow's global position, including its relations with China?
John, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's a privilege to be on this panel with General Breedlove and with Ivana and Oksana. And to Ivana, Oksana, and to all Ukrainians, I extend my heartfelt sympathies for the tragedy that has befallen you as a result of Vladimir Putin's wholly unprovoked, unjustified attack on your country and on your freedom. And we all stand with you, of course, here today and every day in the future. I think this has done tremendous damage to Putin's global standing, for sure. I think for those who had not seen earlier signs, including when he came to power in 1999 as prime minister, first overseeing a brutal, bloody invasion of Chechnya that led to casualties in the tens of thousands, continuing with the invasion of Georgia in 2008, the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, the bloody saving of Assad in Syria with allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. It's unfortunate that it has taken the events of the past 2 weeks or so for the rest of the world to wake up, but wake up it has. And as you mentioned, I think we've seen a sea change in policy, particularly in Germany, where I give Chancellor Scholz great credit for what he has done. And I think we will not see Mr. Putin bounce back as he has tried to in the past. This has been a bridge too far for most in the international community. When it comes to China, we had seen the statement that Putin and Xi had released at the start of the Olympics in early February, talking about a friendship that knows no bounds. I do think that this current situation is making the Chinese leadership uncomfortable, and I don't expect that the Chinese will help Russia to break or skirt around the sanctions. I think China will not want to risk its relationship with the United States and other countries that have imposed sanctions on Putin. So I think even there, we are unlikely to see much breakthrough and room for Putin to maneuver with Beijing. The last thing I'll say is the other day in the UN General Assembly, there were only 5 countries that voted against a resolution condemning Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. One of those was Russia, of course, Syria, Eritrea, North Korea, and I'm blanking on the other one. None of them are countries you want to be in company with. And so even countries like Cuba and Nicaragua didn't side with Russia in opposing the resolution. Belarus was the other one, sorry. And so that reflects, I think, the international isolation we have seen. There were some countries that abstained that should have voted for the resolution, and hopefully in the future they will see the light of day. Thanks.
Okay, Dave, let me just follow one quick question. Given the fact that we've seen problems on the ground for Russia in Ukraine, what do you think they do next?
According to President Macron, based on his phone call yesterday with Putin, he worries that Putin is determined to continue on and try to seize the entire country. It seems to me, and General Breedlove touched on this, that the only way that he will do that is through massive bombing and slaughter of more Ukrainians, unless the international community steps in and tries to stop it. I completely agree that the Ukrainians have been absolutely heroic in their efforts to defend their country, but it is not an even fight. I think there has been an overestimation of Russian capabilities by some analysts, a real underestimation of Ukraine's ability to push back and to defend its own land. Keep in mind, the Ukrainians are fighting for their country. They're fighting for their freedom. The Russian soldiers who were there don't know what the hell they're there for. They were sent on a mission that is almost impossible. The only way I think Putin can prevail is if he shows his real true colors, and that is through massive killing and destruction. And I hope we can help stop that.
Indeed, we'll come to that in a little bit. Okay, Oksana, you have great expertise and activism in the humanitarian area. There are now 2 million refugees in the EU already, not all just from this current invasion. How many can we expect, and what are their most acute needs?
All right. So as of yesterday, 500,000 Ukrainians came only to Poland. And generally, the amount of refugees that are expected from Ukraine can be up to 5 million. And but it all depends on the way how Putin will continue the war. So if he goes this full-scale awful scenario that you are now talking about, nobody, and if he goes real all Ukraine, then nobody can guarantee. But the estimation is around 5 million. And I must tell you frankly that I'm by the chance of the destiny, I was in Poland when it all happened, and Polish people seem us so open and so welcoming, and we don't have Polish authorities are working very fast in order to solve all the problems that refugees might be having. But for now, their major priority is to just to provide the first stage for them to come and to try to host them and to understand what's next. So we are not yet there, even in the second stage because nobody knows the time, what is happening, how it's happening. So we had a huge, at some point, at some of the border, there was a huge lines, and people were standing for several days. Now it's becoming a little bit better. They opened more checkpoints, and there are so many NGOs and volunteer organizations who are working there on the border and trying to help people. So the major needs are, look, it's general humanitarian needs: food, clothes, stuff, and then we will start talking only about the next stages of that.
Okay. Thank you. But let me ask a follow-up question. You've seen the news, of course, from the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, and it looks like the agreement is being reached on a humanitarian corridor. What do you think will happen with this? What will that be the impact on refugee flows?
Could you repeat that? We have what now?
A humanitarian corridor. In other words, a corridor would be set aside from, would there be no fighting?
Look, it's not that somebody believes in that. I must tell you very frankly. So the level of trust to Russian government is extremely low. So
Of course.
For now, whatever they are, as Ivana has mentioned, they are going against every rule of the war, every just human basic values, and so nobody will believe them. Nobody will believe them. So I don't think that. I think that now the flow of refugees, and I'm so sad that I have to use this term concerning Ukrainians, but the flow of refugees directly connected with the Putin aggressiveness and the tools that he is using in Ukraine. So the more aggressive he starts fighting all other cities, of course, the people then will try to flee to other countries to find safety. And I must remind you that we are talking about women and children. We are not talking about young men or old men. So usually it's only women and children who are coming here. Men are bringing them to the border, and then they are coming back to Ukraine to fight. I don't know whether you know the statistics, but in several days, 80,000 Ukrainian men came back to Ukraine to protect their families and to fight.
No, you're right. This speaks to the point Oksana made about the valor of the Ukrainian people. Okay, General, you and Kurt Volker wrote a brilliant op-ed for SIPA this week on establishing a partial no-fly zone and other steps from the West to help Ukraine defend itself against Moscow's aggression. Please explain your position and what you expect to happen next.
Thank you first. And if I could I just set the stage for why we're having this conversation about what's next?
Please.
My assertions are that in 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia, the response of the West was inadequate. And we leaned in immediately to economic tools, and sanctions began. And there were a lot of reasons why we ended up in 2014, but one of them was because our response to 2008 was inadequate to task. In 2014, when Russia invaded Ukraine for the first 2 times it has invaded Ukraine, we again responded primarily with economic measures and sanctions. And I would say once again, the West's response in 2014 were inadequate to task. And so now we find ourselves back in 2022. And yes, there are other reasons why we are here now, but I believe the West's response to 2008 and 2014 are at least a big part of why we're back here again. And so now what we have to choose is, are we going to address this in a way this time that would preclude being back here in 2 or 3 more years in other countries, etc., because we don't reply to this one adequately? And I believe that the impetus for Ambassador Volker's and my op-ed is that we need to begin to think about other tools. Clearly, our nation and the West are putting on a set of sanctions this time that are pretty impressive. But just like in 08, just like in 14, and just like trying to avert this horrible crime that's going on in Ukraine right now, sanctions have not worked. Sanctions, yes, have punished Russia. They've punished the people. They've punished the economy, but they have not changed Mr. Putin's behavior. Our measure of merit should not be punishing the Russian people. Our measure of merit should be, have we changed Mr. Putin's behavior? And so far, just like Mighty Casey, we're 0 for 3 swinging at the plate. And so we need to get it right this time. And so what Ambassador Volker and I have done is try to introduce a series of new thinking that might help us to use additional tools in our belt, not just sanctions. The first one addresses intelligence. We know we're sharing intelligence with the Ukrainians now, but It's a rather torturous path. It's not at real time, or what I call it's not at threat speed. And we would encourage our government to begin to share that quality intel at threat speed, at electronic speed, rather than through staffs and phone calls and people. We'd like to see the flow of weapons continue, and for us to look at other measures. You've seen this flotilla of ships that is off the coast right now of Odessa. Imagine if we had given Ukraine coastal defense cruise missiles when they first asked for them weeks ago. That flotilla would not be sitting off the coast of Odessa. And so there are other weapons that we need to consider and continue to supply the ones that we are. We are thankful that our government has adopted this provision of the javelins, and now finally American Stingers, we believe will actually be arriving in Ukraine, and that will be a good thing. We've followed the EU and some of the NATO nations' offer of aircraft to Ukraine. Apparently there was objection to the thought of those aircraft fighting out of Poland and being provisioned and flown out of Poland. Actually, I kind of agree with that concern. But what I think we could do is continue on with the transfer of those aircraft to the Ukrainian Air Force and transfer them and not fly them out of a NATO nation, but allow Ukraine to have these aircraft because they could be rapidly assimilated into the Air Force of Ukraine since they fly similar types. We've heard a wonderful idea. Apparently there are a number of Ukrainian pilots who were exchange pilots in our Air Force and have experience in the A-10. Why not provision those the Ukrainian Air Force with A-10 so that these gentlemen who have experience in it could use that weapon? Imagine what an A-10 could do to that column north of Kyiv right now.
Phil, explain what an A-10 does for our audience.
So the A-10 is a premier close air support, air-to-ground attack aircraft that the United States has used for decades, and it is built for attacking armored formations on the ground. And what we have is a 40-mile-long stalled armored formation. Imagine the A-10 being able to address that issue for our Ukrainian brothers and sisters. And then finally, the things that are talked the most about now. Recently, several of us proposed a no-fly zone. That was rejected, and I understand the rejection. In fact, when I proposed it, I explained that a typical military no-fly zone is really an act of war because what you have to do to enforce the no-fly zone. So Ambassador Volker and I worked together on an idea that has actually been used in other parts of the world before, and that is a humanitarian no-fly zone. A no-fly zone that has what we call ROE, rules of engagement, that are very different than a military no-fly zone. But what it would provide for is the cover to allow humanitarian operations in and out of NATO nations along the western border of Ukraine into the nation of Ukraine, and that those humanitarian corridors would be protected by aircraft from maybe only the United States in a bilateral contribution, or possibly even by NATO in a contribution from the alliance. But I think that the only reason that this option might be and should be considered is because it can be constructed such that it's not an act of war. And so I would encourage that we work on that. Yes, it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. But the fact of the matter is, I believe we need to begin talking about other tools to directly help the Ukrainian military. And before I leave, may I just say that we are so happy and proud of the leadership of President Zelensky. But I don't know if you saw the statement in the last 2 days by President Zelensky's wife and what she said about standing for her children and standing by her husband and standing for the Ukrainian people. But it is an amazing statement. If you haven't seen it, you need to read it. We have a president and we have a first lady in Ukraine who are truly leaders in this world.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. All right, Ivana, two things for you. First, if in fact Russia's offensive continues to make progress and Ukraine's military is substantially reduced to a relatively small nucleus, and Russia gains control over much more Ukrainian land, what will be the response of the Ukrainian people? Will there be a resistance, a partisan war?
You know what? I don't even want to discuss the what if we are going to be defeated, and that's exactly what you're trying to suggest. And then how the Ukrainian people, whether we will be conducting a partisan war, guerrilla war, or not. I don't think that this is exactly the priority at this particular moment. We have real priority at this particular moment to help Ukraine to defend itself and to hit Russia with real sanctions. You know,
You just anticipated my second question, so please continue.
Okay. The thing is that if a fraction of that support that we Ukrainians are receiving right now from the West was given to us back in 2014, I think we would have not been here where we are today. And all these policies of appeasement, of not provoking Russia, of so-called diplomacy and so on, are actually have led to this situation where we are at this particular moment. And yes, these critical mistakes and this drastic miscalculations will have to be within lessons learned from now on. And but that probably will have to be done after the war will end. Right now, there is an importance of real action. So yes, unprecedented sanctions have been taken against Russian Federation. But what we are seeing that only 15% of Russian banks were cut off SWIFT, which means it's nothing, because the central bank was pulled out from that list.
Have we lost Ivana?
Can you hear me?
Now we hear you. Please continue.
So it doesn't look serious, this cutting off Russia being cut off SWIFT, or this sanctions that have been used against Russian oligarchs or Russian inner circle that is near Putin. Peskov's son is having fun in Paris, and I think that all of their children, all of their wives have to be immediately kicked out from all the Western countries and stop enjoying the life that they are banning us from having on our land. I think sanctions are not enough, even now, not to mention how pitiful they were in 2008 with regard to Georgia, or in 2014 with regard to first attack on Ukraine. So embargo on oil and gas from buying from Russia. Yes, I hear that U.S. administration doesn't want to hear this, doesn't want to give up on importing oil from the Russian Federation. So with one hand, we're punishing Russia, but with the other hand, we are paying Russia to finance its economy and to finance its armed forces that are right now killing our people in the streets. I just wanted to reflect just for a second on what Oksana was saying. Oksana was saying that you were asking her about humanitarian corridors. We just have the confirmation that Russia has disagreed and has not agreed to provide humanitarian corridor for the people from Kherson to be evacuated. Russia this morning in the northern territories of Kharkiv region blocked Ukrainian population from actually fleeing further through the internal Ukrainian territories to the west of Ukraine, and they are forcefully deporting them to Russian Federation. So Russia wants to erase Ukrainians as a state, as a country, as a nation, as people from the map of the world. And we as Western nations are watching this and basically are right now watching genocide live. That's exactly what is happening. And I am
Absolutely.
and I told that, you know, okay, you cannot give us no-fly zone. We all are watching right now. I was looking at this news from NATO ministerial meeting. Great concerns, condemnation, actions, finally weapons being given. Too late. It's going to be too late and too little for the cause that we are fighting right now. So therefore, it's so important that you finally get your act together, because in order for the ocean of regret and remorse would not overwhelm you after this war is over and after our nation is wiped out from the world's face. With regard, we are asking no-fly zone. Everybody is so afraid of clashing with Russian Federation. Russian Federation has already started the World War III. It is already ongoing. It just started with us. If he swallows Ukraine, if we fall, then it will spill over anyhow on your territories, on European nations, and you will feel ashamed at that point that you could have prevented it. Yes, I know that NATO countries are defending themselves. Yes, we understand. But here we are talking about the whole nation being turned into new Aleppo in the center of Europe, and that's what is going to happen. So, if you are not going to respond, we are asking for air defense. We are asking for planes, and the cynicism of the situation. And I'm thanking Bill for suggesting this as well. But the governments that are to take this decision are not taking these decisions. Okay, we are here, we are fighting, so provide us everything that will make us strong. And you know that Russia is afraid of the language of strength, capability, unity, and action. We are here to do that. So, but reinforce us. And don't dwell on those bureaucratic decisions. I know that it takes already 5 days for Ukrainians to send from the US additional body armor, additional helmets that were bought by Ukrainian diaspora, different night vision goggles and such equipment, because these are dual-use products, and the US is not giving, the US authorities, customs are not giving the permission. Guys, lift those bureaucratic procedures at this particular moment. This is about our survival, and that's what we are asking for. That's exactly what we need from you. So we need sanctions, we need no-fly zone. We will be begging you for this no-fly zone. We need air defense. We need airplanes. We need basic equipment, from manpads to javelins to body armor to ankle boots to communications for the armed forces and for territorial defense. That's all we need. That's everything what we need. We need humanitarian assistance in this particular moment. And when I see some nations like Britain not giving a waiver to Ukrainian people to who are fleeing the war to come to Britain, I do not understand what's going on.
Oksana, we really got to move on. What you're saying
one more thing, and I'm glad that finally 38 nations have actually applied to the International Criminal Court to open up the case against Putin as a war criminal, as a person who is responsible for crimes against humanity. And I hope that this war will end by negotiations between Russian Federation on one side, Ukraine, and all the free nations at our back, prosecuting Putin in this high court in The Hague.
Ivana, thank you. That was an impassioned and absolutely essential oration. Okay, David, I'm going to go to Oksana next, and then we'll come back to you to finish with the regular questions of rounds. Oksana, you're in Poland organizing assistance. How long are the wait times at the borders? Are delays on the Ukrainian side or the Polish side? Is there anything to be done to reduce the wait times?
It's already happening. The delays are already trying to be reduced because they are opening the new points to cross the border, and they are lifting all the Polish side are lifting all needed limitations on that. So just if you don't have foreign passport or something, you can enter anyway. But of course there were some. The lines actually were for several days there. That was a humanitarian disaster that was happening. But now both Ukrainians and Polish, you can watch online what's the time of waiting on each and every checkpoints, So you can now reroute your route where you're going to. So actually, it is getting better. People are working on that, and I think also there is a need for some digital tools for all of that to be happening. But again, because look, you can't find any organization or any structure, government, who would have been prepared for that. For 500,000 people that are coming to your country, to any country, in several days. This is physically impossible to predict, on that scale, and to prepare. So yes, unfortunately, that was happening. But again, I would so support Ivana with what she was saying. It's only, we are ready to fight. Ukrainians are fighting again. They are coming back. I have a number of friends who are stuck as me at the moment the war broke out, and they came back to Kiev. Warsaw is now the hub where people are coming to Warsaw, saying hello, saying goodbye, and coming back to Kiev. So they are fighting, but the humanitarian crisis, this is something that you already feel in it. Is what Ivanka was saying, that you are feeling it on European side. Several millions people, women and children, who are running here. And it's not, it's not the end. It's just, unfortunately, as what we are seeing, it's the beginning of something. So we will do, Ukrainian government and the Polish government, I'm sure, will do utmost possible to help people, the ones in need, to come here to find safety locations. But it will take time. And again, the more people that come in, the huge catastrophe will be here.
Okay, Oksana, thank you very much. And David, I wanted to end with you because of Ivana's impassioned and I think correct plea for assistance. And Ivana, I think you probably know that David's views are rather similar to your own. So David, what are the strengths and weaknesses of US policy in this Russian war on Ukraine? And just more importantly, what should Biden do now?
Well, John, I think the administration has had both an extraordinary response, but a response that has not been anywhere near enough. Extraordinary in the sense of the swiftness and impact of the sanctions that have been imposed, thanks to the coordination by the administration with our allies. And it's had an immediate effect with the plummet in the value of the ruble, the rise in interest rates. We have seen a real impact already, but obviously it is not enough because Putin is determined to continue his campaign. We shouldn't worry that we are painting Putin into a corner. After all, we didn't impose any sanctions before he invaded Ukraine. We've only done this in response to his invasion of Ukraine. Moreover, Putin's painted himself in a corner, and it's his problem to figure out how to get out. NATO was not an issue in 2013-14 when Putin first invaded. It wasn't an issue this time. For those who want to blame NATO enlargement, they're really missing the entire picture here. This is Putin paranoid about a successful Ukraine. So what do? I think General Breedlove's recommendations with Kurt Volker in his piece were spot on, except for the last one. And it's with all due respect that I disagree. I don't think a restricted no-fly zone is the right answer. That consigns the rest of Ukraine to aerial bombardment from the Russians. I think if we're going to do a no-fly zone, We have to do it for the entire country. The humanitarian corridors, as Ivana just explained, actually would not be the ones going to the west, to Poland. We're talking about humanitarian corridors that would come from Kharkiv, Kherson, and other places. That's in the eastern part of the country. And so if we're going to protect that, then we're going to be in the eastern part of the country. I do think that we do not want to wait until we see video and pictures of Ukrainians slaughtered and massacred. The whole point is to prevent that from happening. I recognize that it is risky, risks escalation with the Russians, it risks direct confrontation with the Russians. But as Ivana said, we are already, I think, for the most part, at war with Putin. And so to me, it does require that we look at kinetic measures if necessary in order to prevent a bloodbath that I think Putin is ready to unleash on Ukraine. I think I'm reminded of the old expression, first they went after the socialists and no one spoke out. I don't want us to be saying that about Ukrainians.
Okay, thank you. I might add that Gary Kasparov put out a tweet today saying we're already in World War III as well. Okay, so we have questions from the audience.
John, could I just throw in
Please, Phil, jump in.
a quick two-finger? Let me just violently agree with David. The bottom line is that, as you saw, several of us, including me, were literally accused of being warmongers for suggesting what you propose for Ukraine. And that our first proposal is exactly as you discuss. What we're trying to do now is help the leaders of our nations think through how to begin, how to start more concrete support. And so I think what you see from Ambassador Volker and I is an attempt to address the concerns of the NATO leadership and the US leadership. We're not trying to be obtuse with our nation. We're not trying to be obtuse with our leadership. It just appears that right now there is no thinking that is going on to try to get after this. And so we have changed drastically our first approach, which is your approach. And we're trying now to find a way to begin to deliver some help on the battlefield to our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. So fear not, I'm in your camp, but we are trying to find a way to get some new think beyond just sanctions. Over. Sorry,
Okay.
John.
No, thank you. That's very useful. All right. I note that many of the questions from the audience have already been answered, especially Phil, by your presentation of the specific things we should be doing. But we have a question here from, let's see now, I've lost it. Okay, Tito Toivonen, and it goes like this. Putin has likely committed war crimes in Ukraine. What would be the way to get him to face justice in The Hague? Ivana, would you like to give that a shot since you spoke eloquently about the need for war crimes prosecution?
I think a lot of those videos that have been already captured by Ukrainians, a lot of those killings that have been happening on our land during these 8 days of war, they are already recorded war crimes and crimes against humanity that will be filed for argumentation in the International Criminal Court against Putin and against all of his accomplices who are carrying out this attack on Ukraine. So if we can have any of the international organizations joining us in recording this, in actually for the court, we would be very grateful for that. Also, I am aware and I am included in one of the groups in conversations, because I think there are like, I don't know, hundreds of groups that are ongoing right now, and where we are trying to coordinate efforts on different issues. And that group is specifically involving already serious lawyers, not only Ukrainian lawyers, but also foreign lawyers who are helping us to document all the things that will have to be brought to the court. Also, people have organized the all around the global, basically, appeal to punish Putin, signing up for the petition for Putin to be prosecuted in the ICC. So you might want to share that as well. We can send you the links, and I think the more people will be pressing on their governments also to get involved in this in this need to ensure that for the crimes, the bloodiest dictator of 21st century has to be punished. I think that would be only giving us additional arguments to be successful at a later stage in the tribunal in The Hague.
Okay, thank you. We have a question, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, from Jinta Palubinskas, and I think this is for David. What's the likelihood we see a growing and ultimately influential anti-war and pro-democracy movement in Russia?
There has been growing speculation, rumors that martial law is going to be declared in Russia, and I think that reflects some uneasiness on the part of Putin with the domestic situation. Keep in mind, the economy was stagnant. Russia was experiencing a real impact from the coronavirus pandemic before all this started, and Putin amended the constitution in 2020 that could keep him conceivably in power until 2036. So for many Russians, particularly young Russians, the outlook was not looking very good. We've seen, I think, brave Russians go out in the streets to protest at risk of assault and arrest by Putin's thugs. And I think we're likely to see more of that. Putin, I think, is afraid of body bags coming back to Russia. That's why he has, and the parliament also passed legislation authorizing these mobile crematoria so that the bodies could be cremated on site and body bags wouldn't, in fact, come back home. He said that he would provide some 50,000 rubles, I believe, and payment to families who lost loved ones. That I don't think he's going to be able to buy off Russians who suffer in this. So to me, I think Putin could face serious problems here. I don't want to exaggerate it. I think it's too early to predict this is the beginning of his end, but I'll just say that these regimes seem stable until they're not.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. We have a question from, or actually a couple of questions from Ambassador Adrian Basura. I'll go with the second one in his queue. As for General Breedlove, can you comment on the apparent possibility that the bulk of the Ukrainian armed forces may soon be trapped in the east? Should they not make a strategic withdrawal to Western Ukraine?
Well, it's an outstanding question, and I am really reticent to advise the Ukrainian military because, frankly, they've done a pretty dang good job so far. When we were there, John, you remember one of the things we heard is that the president felt like during the run-up to this, we were so focused on what Russia was doing along the border and the forces that we, one, didn't see what was or report on what was happening by Russia inside the country. But he also said, you're so focused on what Russia's doing, you haven't been watching what we've been doing. And the Ukrainian military has done, I think, a superb job of arranging a defense in depth, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to try to put my trust and confidence in the leadership that has brought them this far. But yes, I mean, in the end game, you and I and the questionnaire see a real problem if all those great forces that were once along the line of contact get trapped by this large pincer movement that we now see from the north and the south. It is a concern. My guess is these great people who are leading the Ukrainian military are thinking about that now, and hopefully we'll see their plans soon.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from, let's see now, Rosa Mary Lenin. Again, I apologize if I mispronounce your name. Oksana, for you. With a long border with Putin's Russia, what should Finland do? Our civil society organizes anti-war protests. Our nation stands with Ukraine. We are a member of the EU, but not a member of NATO. We do feel the threat. Ivana, are you there? Or are you frozen? Yes, please unmute.
Could you once more repeat it? Because
Yes.
the
Okay.
communication-
She says, she's from Finland. She says, we have a long border with Putin's Russia. Our civil society organizes anti-war protests. Our nation stands with Ukraine. We're a member of the EU, but not NATO. We feel the threat. So what should Finland do to help Ukraine?
You know, I hear that today the ministers of foreign affairs of NATO countries and ministers of Finland and Sweden have agreed that for all the next meetings with regard to this war will be held with participation of Finnish and Swedish ministers. So that means that basically, I think NATO could take the decision at this particular moment to have Finland and Sweden in. And I would really suggest to our Finnish colleagues to use this opportunity to apply now. You don't need a long road. I think the next day the decision could be taken that you and your Swedish colleagues are in. With regard to how you can help us, I think it's by helping us, you are helping yourselves. So weapons, just to ensure that Ukrainians are capable of fighting back. And this needs to be done yesterday or a day before yesterday, or needed to be done. And so weapons, working with humanitarian and also joining and pressing for real sanctions being carried out further against Putin's regime. I think these are three things, and I'm afraid that we cannot expect that Finland would be the one leading the effort to establish a no-fly zone or giving us air defense or planes. These are the most urgent needs at this particular moment. So weapons, gear, defensive air defense capabilities, planes, and humanitarian assistance, and pressure on Putin.
Okay, thank you, Ivana. Another question from Finland, this time for General Breedlove, and a rather provocative question too. It's from Mikko Lakonen, and the question is this: if the Western world decided to intervene in this horrid war, what would such an operation potentially look like?
Well, yes, that is a provocative question, since both the leaders of NATO and the leaders of the United States have said we are not going to do that. But first of all, things are being proposed right now, which could be executed relatively quickly, like a fairly comprehensive no-fly zone. And the direct aid to humanitarian assistance going in and out, these things I think are easy first steps that would signal to our Russian opponents that we're not interested in making this bigger. We're interested in shutting this down. Clearly, there could be more bellicose responses, and then I think we truly are in a situation where we have to be careful where it leads. But the fact of the matter is, and this is what we're advocating for, and what the conversation I had with David, there are first steps that could be done, which could make a difference and signal that we're ready to try to get out of what's going on, as opposed to accelerate what's going on. And that would be the things I would propose. And let's do this. They may not agree and they may not even come, but let's have the conversations even with Russia, saying, listen, enough. And we're going to do this so that we can take care of all the people that you are killing and maiming and causing to be homeless, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think those first steps are things that should be considered.
All right, Phil, thank you. All right, we have a question from Patrick Dalzell. And David, I think this is for you, and this is probably the last one we can do. The question is this: in addition to the help that Ukraine desperately needs, we also need to think urgently about Moldova. If Odessa falls, I fear he will go for Moldova too. What can be done?
John, if I can, let me just pick up on what General Breedlove was just saying. There have been two recent cases where Russia got strong pushback from NATO and they did nothing about it. The first was Turkey, when they shot down a Russian military jet that violated Turkish airspace. 2 pilots were killed. Russia huffed and puffed, but did nothing. The second time was 2018, when Wagner mercenaries were threatening American forces based in Syria. We warned them to stay away. They didn't. Our aircraft then bombed and killed some 200 to 300 of Russian mercenaries. The Russians said nothing about it, nothing publicly. When we push back strongly, there has been a tendency in the past for Putin to back down. Again, I'm not advocating for a direct military confrontation with Russia, but I think the only language Putin understands is strength. When it comes to Moldova, Secretary Blinken is going to make a visit there along with the Baltic states and Poland, as well as Brussels, I believe. And so I think there is concern about Moldova, particularly the forces that are in Transnistria, the so-called breakaway part of Moldova. Moldovan government has done an amazing job under President Maya Sandu and the leadership there. We need to support them because they have already been targeted by Putin and his forces as a result of the weaponization of energy in Moldova. And so Moldova is vulnerable. We have to do everything we can to bolster it so that Putin doesn't get, if you will, to borrow a Stalinist phrase, dizzy with success and think he can keep going. Thank you.
All right. Yes, we need to have him dizzy with failure. All right. Thank you very much to our panelists for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for our audience for tuning in. We will be doing another event on this next Friday at the same time. And, we are watching this closely. Thank you.